4-time filming this and countless takes later, let's hope this works out. Let's talk about Mac Studio M3 Ultra. I'm ArtIsRight. This is a fast computer that will get things done and get you on your way. However, I still think there's a lot of great value in a user refurb M2 Ultra and M1 Ultra machine. I'll share with you some of the thoughts in this video. If you want me to make a separate video, do let me know in the comment section. Now, where the M3 Ultra is faster than the other silicon variant, for example, the Max and the Pro, it's by a pretty good margin. However, where it falls behind the latest generation architecture, M4, Max, and Pro, it's by a small margin if we're going to see right now, because this isn't 3 generation, this is an M3, it's not an M4 Ultra generation, so that's not what we got this time around. So we no longer have a clear winner across the board, but where it wins in terms of CPU and GPU power, is still there. So it's definitely still the machine to choose. Now, I'll be sharing with you lots of information. Please pause the video so you can analyze the result yourself in addition to the analysis I'll be sharing with you. A few things that you can definitely do to help out the channel is to hit on that like button. This way YouTube algorithm will push this video to an even larger audience. If you haven't subscribed yet, please consider doing so. If you can share this video with 3 other people, I would greatly appreciate that. More views, right? It's always great to do these type of content that way. And just remember, this channel is self-funded. If you want to help out, a YouTube super thanks is just right below this video, or you can use the link to a tip jar that I will put in the description too. Now, with that said, again, one-person show, be kind in the comments. All right, with that said, we're going to take a look at this M3 Ultra desktop Mac Studio. There are other variants coming in. There are also the M4 Max coming in, so I'll be testing that and sharing with you the videos as soon as I have them. But for now, we're going to take a look at this one. And I'm referring to this as the M3 Ultra base. When I talk about the top or the base, I'm referring to the silicon, not the computer overall, just the silicon. Let's be clear about that. Now, if you want to know the core speed for the performance, efficiency, and also GPU core, I put that there. And in my testing, the peak power consumption was 136 watts, for those of you that want to know that. And the amount of memory I put on mine is 256. This is a custom order. The base one is 96 gigabyte, but we're not going to be testing that machine this time around. So just a little FYI on that one. Here are all the other computers in the lineup that I have. Now, the reason why I went with 256, because my Ultra right now, M2, has 128, and I don't want to really go down in memory because there are some times where I use that much memory on the system. So going up higher, I mean, I wish there was an option for 128, but there's none. So we're also going to see the M2 Max, M1 Ultra, and again, M2 Ultra. You're going to see all these Mac Mini lineup, and particularly of one of interest would be the M4 Pro. This is just the stock configuration, and it actually does wonders in all the tasks, considering the price point relative to the Ultra machine. You're also going to see the result from the M4 Pro and Max on the laptop machine. Going back to the M1 for Max, back to the M1 for Pro, and let's throw in the result from the M1 generation laptops too. Why not? Because I already have the result. And lastly, I will have the result from the test PC where it is there so that you can see. Configuration and buyer's guide will be towards the end of this video, and this has been updated to represent a lot of really great information that I really thought through on this one. Remember that with Apple Silicon, there are 2 segmentations. There is the consumer leaning one and the pro oriented. So if you are a pro, if you make money doing this, right, I recommend just going with a pro. It costs a little bit more, especially when you jump from this into, for example, like the pro category, but you're going to get much more performance from that. Max is definitely a great consideration now, especially you do photography workflow, because all the apps now, at least the one I've tested here anyway, can go in and utilize the extra GPU on the system. Upgrade priority. This is what you can choose on your system to upgrade to get the most performance per dollar, starting with the amount of memory. When you choose this, a lot of times you know the number you want, you're locked into a certain chip family, because if you want to go more, sometimes you have to upgrade the silicon. This is seen especially in the M3 Max, M4 Max generation, and now in the M3 Ultra too. If you have extra money, look at SSD storage. And lastly, chip variant is going to give you the least amount of performance. But a lot of times this is tied into number 1 at the very top there, where it's tied into the memory. So sometimes you don't have a choice. But if you just go in there just to upgrade the variants, you're going to probably see the least amount of performance per dollar spent. Nano texture. What are we talking about here? This is not a laptop. These are desktop machines. All right. I'll be taking a pro perspective on this. So from a pro photography and also a video standpoint, I'm doing single app testing. If you're multitasking, definitely get more RAM in the system. If you're looking at Ultra, there's more RAMs already, so you don't really need to worry about that. And just even the base Ultra will do a lot of people wonders. So There are other configurations that you can really order, spend a lot of money on these. I am just going to stick with mostly a stock configuration for the machine that I'm going to inventory, or the one for my clients. The one that I'm going to use myself has been upgraded, but that's what we're going to do. If you have other configurations you want me to test, you happen to get one, you happen to live in Southern California, and it is relatively recent, meaning that within a week or two of this video, please feel free to reach out. I would love to borrow some time on your machine. So I've also done some reference and comparison testing as well, because I've done testing in the last cycle on different OS, and I verified that even in a newer OS, there are some speed changes, some timing changes, but it's still within the margin of error, so we're going to go forward with that. Now, optimization. There's a lot more apps now that are optimized for Apple Silicon, thank goodness, and one company that I definitely want to call out is Capture One. I'll share with you some result later on, which is going to be very interesting. So my initial impression of this Mac Studio is that it is exactly the same. Do note that when you get the Ultra, all the ports are Thunderbolt 5. When you get the Max, the front two USB-C ports are USB-C and not Thunderbolt connection. Otherwise, they're pretty much the same. The heatsink on the Ultra is all copper, on the Max is aluminum, so it's a little bit lighter, but you know, these are little semantics here and there. So I have also done the calibration on both software and hardware, and it passed on these systems without any problem at all. And if you're coming from an Intel machine, I highly recommend you set this up as a new machine, or even if you're upgrading from a previous generation Apple Silicon, I would still recommend that you do the setup as a new machine. I'll show you some of my pro tips for setting up a machine. In fact, I have a video this time around filmed almost tandem with this one, so you're going to be able to see the videos on how to set up your machine this time around. So that would be a good thing. Here is how you read the specs. And the one thing I definitely want to talk about is SSD. So even though there's a module on the inside that you can swap in and out now, you have to go buy the module, you have to initialize the machine. It's not quite as easy and as straightforward to really do that. So for the most part, configure SSD for what you're really going to need it to do. Configure it to size. Don't worry too much about the speed, because you're going to be fine anyway, and you can always plug in external devices. Here are the speed of SSD on these Ultras. I mean, they're more than fast enough even at the 1 terabyte one. Here's the speed for the rest of the machine. If you want to check that out, you can certainly do that. And if you really want to know, do you need the latest and fastest SSD or not to use in your pro workflow, I'll leave a link to this video. That it's been produced some time ago now, but it's still valid today. You don't need the fastest SSD and spend the most amount of money. I would look at the sweet spot. So if you have to get the previous generation because it's cheaper than the Thunderbolt 5 generation, that would be a great way to go. RAM, when it comes to this, the memory in your system, you cannot upgrade. So choose your memory wisely. Think about your workflow and what you need. And if you're not sure, if you're already using a Mac, restart your Mac, launch Activity Monitor, go into the Memory tab, and monitor memory pressure. Start your creative workflow and go throughout the day. If you're in green, you probably go with the amount that you have. If you're in yellow or red, you probably want to get more memory on your system. One thing that I do not recommend is to go down on the memory, but if you're already looking at the Ultra, you're starting with like 64 and in the previous generation and 96 now, you're fine. I'm talking about if you have like 32 gigabytes of memory or less, you definitely don't want to go down in memory in that regard. Another app that I use to track my memory usage and pressure throughout time is iStat Menu 7. I'm not sponsored by them, but they do keep track of your memory pressure over a period of time, which is really great to see. So on these new computers, there are now low power mode. If you have the Ultra, I don't think low power mode is really going to do much at all because the fan barely runs on this system. However, if you have the Max, or if you have, for example, the M4 Pro, and you can apply the low power mode to those Mac Mini as well, I think that would be great for music studios. And it's something that's highly needed, especially if you don't need the Pro machine in your workflow. So I've been noticing a slowdown trend, and I'll share some of that with you. Just some of the thoughts and observation after testing these for like about 5 years now, but there has been that happening, so maybe configure your machine a little bit more, it might help. Now let's take a look at Lightroom Classic 14.2. One-to-one preview for 1000 Sony a7R5 61 megapixel. The Ultras are showing up at the very top, M3 right there. This is the M2 Max. But interesting enough, I'm going to add in one more desktop, or all the other desktop machine. But we see something interesting here. M4 Pro is beating up the M2 Max by a pretty good margin there. So these are some things to think about now, right? Depending on the machine that you want to choose. And by the way, this is just the stock configuration. So something to think about there. Now, this is still significantly faster, but you're talking about almost like probably 2.5 times as much cost-wise. So something to think about there. Personally, I would still choose this over anything because I love speed. I want to be able to get things done fast, but those are considerations you need to add in now when you're thinking about these machines. Here's the rest of the other machines in the lineup. And here's the export. I throw in the result for the M4 Pro in there because this export task, unlike the import that uses CPU only, this uses CPU and GPU in combination. So having a max here is showing the advantage. So we're kind of like not really winning in all categories. It really just depends. But something that you have to remember, this max is 2 generations behind this Pro. But we're not really here to talk about that. We're here to talk about the Ultra. And the Ultra is definitely faster than the previous generation by a pretty good margin there. So it's really good. And it's also much faster than all these other machines in the lineup. We'll see how the M4 Max is going to do in the Mac Studio. I'm really curious about that. So when we add in the rest of the desktop that I have in the lineup, these are the spread for the numbers and the rest of the computers in the lineup for your consideration there. All right. Lightroom Classic HDR merge. This is where we start to see the crack in the processor or in the chip architect generation. It's 1 generation behind. It doesn't come quite to the top because the single core CPU speed to do all this is not quite as fast as in the M4 generation. So something interesting to note there. Even the M4 is slightly faster than the M3 Ultra, but this is an architectural thing, right? Like I said, where it doesn't really come up ahead, it's pretty much close up there right at the top in a very small margin, but where it wins by a large margin. Lightroom Classic Panorama Merge. So for this, you can see that the Ultra is sitting there all at the very top and timing is about the same. This is a task that uses mostly CPU and RAM, but mostly just RAM. So giving a lot of amount of memory in the system is doing a lot of really good here. Here's the rest of the other machine in the lineup, and all these machines, it did not finish the task. So just a little FYI there. AI Noise Reduction. This is a task that's supposed to be running on the NPU, but there are some noise artifacting or color artifacting. So it's still running on the GPU as of now. And when we take a look at this one, timing between all the Ultra are really close to each other. You start to see the M2 Max like spread a little bit more because, again, more GPU cores on the system, right? M4 Pro is falling behind. I would venture that when we have the M4 Max Studio will probably come in somewhere between the M2 Ultra, either before or a little bit after that. But, you know, just something to think about there. I'll have the results share with you as soon as I start testing them. Here's the rest of the AI noise reduction. And now we're going to do AI noise reduction to 10 photos that are a mixture of different cameras. And we can see that, yeah, this is a GPU-based task, and GPU on the M3 Ultra is definitely faster, but having the same amount of GPU cores, 60 and 60 versus M2, speed improvement is only marginal in Lightroom Classic AI noise reduction for these large amount of files. So something to think about there. And that's the reason why I said that the M2 and M1 Ultra is still a really great contender if you need a lot of GPUs, if you need a lot of CPU power on the system. I'm also going to say that if you can get the M1 Ultra for maybe around like 2K pricing, that's kind of like just the sweet spot, because it beats out all these other machines, including this base one, and it's only marginally more than the base configuration needs. So just something to think about there. Let's take a look at the other desktop in a lineup right there. This is spreading in a way how we think it's going to go based on the amount of GPU that's available in the system. Here's the rest of the computer for your consideration. And we're going to do AI Sky and noise, or AI Sky and subject masking. So for this one, timing are just about the same. M4 generation is definitely faster on this one, faster, just like GPU, CPU, all in combination. But even though this one is using a lot of GPU, it's still slightly faster in this regard. I mean, like I said, it's only 2 seconds behind. It's not a big deal there, but we don't see a clear winner anymore. It's something that I said before. Here's the rest of the other machine in the lineup. Ultra is still coming up there, doing pretty well on its own. And here's the rest. Interestingly enough, when we take a look at this task, all the M4 generations are pretty much pulling up ahead of the Ultra, and those are even in the laptop configuration. Again, only about a second or two, but it's showing that the M3 architecture is falling behind in some areas. Very small amount, but that does happen. All right, Lightroom, this is version 8.2, and this is using local storage. And for this one, I'm only sharing you one chart. The 2 Ultra, M3 Ultra, M2 Ultra are still at the very top, and M3 Ultra is actually doing a pretty good job. This export algorithm is different in Lightroom Classic. This uses CPU, GPU, and RAM combined. Sometimes this is faster than Classic, sometimes a little bit slower. This is a time where It's slightly slower than Classic now, and that's where the M1 Ultra lands in this regard. So you can kind of get an idea where all these things are. Now let's take a look at Capture One. This is version 16.5.8.4, and there's more digits, so probably put it there. But one thing I wanted to commend Capture One on is they have improved the import algorithm to go in and utilize a lot more of the CPU speed on the system, or the CPU core, and this really shows a significant amount even in my last testing cycle. And even in this latest version, the timing again between this cycle and the last cycle are within a margin of error of each other, but we see now that having more cores on the M3 Ultra is showing wonders compared to the rest, and M4 Pro is just nudging right between there, so it's going to be very interesting to see where the M4 Max is going to land. Now here's the rest of the import for the other desktop machines and for the rest of the computer, including a laptop, so that you can look at this. Now when it comes to export, so for export, this really goes in and utilizes just GPU, and this is a good indicator that you have the same amount of GPU cores there, but there are some time variation, because I think Capture One is a pretty good program to judge how it performs now, like how the computer would perform, because it goes in and use those power kind of almost like linearly, meaning that it's going to use all the power, but it's also going to use the max amount of speed that you can see. So this also means that the M3 Ultra, the GPU is obviously faster than the M2 Ultra, and we're seeing that, and we're seeing a slight slower speed in the M1 Ultra, but again, really great value. Only like what, about less than 3 minutes behind. That's not really a bad deal at all. When we go to the Max, we start to see a little bit more slowdown in the Pro. Add in all the desktop in the lineup, you start to see the numbers based on the GPU core, and this is a little bit shorter because I don't have the rest of the machine like retested, but we're seeing some really good numbers here, and these are things to consider. So for Photoshop, I'm using digital Lloyd chamber test for this one. I'm doing these 3 of the tests. So let's take a look at how the Photoshop is going to perform, and the M4 generation is pulling up ahead on the desktop. When we add in the rest of the machine in the lineup, we can see that all the M4 generation are pulling up ahead. Now, these are only about a second at the very most, but nonetheless, it kind of shows you that the M4 generation clock speed and efficiency is a little bit better than the M3 architecture. This is also somewhat reflected in the 15.7 gigabytes because this has so much amount of memory in the system, it's actually pulling out ahead on the Ultra there. M4 Pro is still showing a pretty good significant pull there, even though it only has 24 gigabytes of memory. So the Ultra still has some advantage when it comes to tasks like this, and you can see the M2 Ultra and the M1 Ultra there. Here's the rest of the machine, and you can see there is a result for the Photoshop huge test, which is more memory, better, but doubling the amount of memory only gains you like what, 3 seconds in performance. Not that big a deal. M1 Ultra holding its own just fine comparing to the rest of the other machine in the lineup. If this is what you do, I would just get more memory in the system. That's just pretty much what I have to say. And yes, there are people who work with these large type of Photoshop file. Might not be every one of us, but there are some that do. Lastly, I want to share with you the result from Puget Bench test. And interestingly enough, the M4 Pro generation, or the M4 generations, doing slightly better than the M3 generation. A lot of this has to do with architecture, core frequencies, and so forth. And we can see very similar result now where the M4 is pulling ahead of the M3 Ultra. Is this by a large margin? It's by some margin, but it's not a significant margin. Although I would say that the M4 Max Studio is going to show us number that may even exceed the desk or the laptop version. So we're going to see that really soon. Final Cut Pro encoder decoder engine, when it comes to here, M1, M2, and M3 uses the same encoder decoder engine architecture. That's why we're seeing the timing on here the same, but it does double that of the Max Silicon as you're seeing right now, and it does quadruple that of the Pro Silicon as you're also seeing there. So the Pro and the regular one has about the same amount of encoder decoder engine, but the one thing that I do want to point out is that on these charts that are shorter, even though they're part of Pro series, these are the M4 generation. So the M4 encoder decoder engine does show a speed improvement, but we're not really seeing it in the M3 because M3 is still using the same architecture from the M2 and M1 generation. Something to think about there. So in a video, it's not that big of a deal. This is also the reason why if you're doing video, M2 or M1 may be a fantastic machine for you to choose. HEVC is about the same, and ProRes 422. I mean, you can start to get the idea for these results there. AfterEffects is using Adobe Benchmark. Link will be in the description. I heard that they have taken the sample demo file down. I would probably maybe email whoever posts that forum post and see if they can put it back. But anyway, these are the results, and you can see that M3 Ultra and the Ultras are all clustering at the very top. M4 Pro desktop, Mac Mini is not that far behind. M2 Max is a little bit behind, so we start to see a generation gap. Do note this is a task that runs on CPU. It doesn't run on GPU or anything like that because there are some artifacting that happens. Here's the rest of the result for your consideration. Premiere Pro, this is using Puget Bench. Longer is better, and Ultra is coming up on top for both M1, or excuse me, for both M3 and M2. M1's falling a little bit behind there because it is a little bit older. I think I was able to run an error test and this number bumped up a little bit, but I will double check that and update this in the next video. All right, here's the rest of the result from Premiere Pro, and lastly, Resolve. So Resolve, M1, M2, M3, coming up at the very top there. This makes a lot of sense. And you can see the rest of the computer in the lineup with the regular M1 not finishing this, and the Air is showing the same thing on the M1 generation. So this is the machine to get if you want to get things done fast. There's no doubt about it. And like I said, where the M3 really is faster, or the M3 Ultra is faster than the other silicon variant, is by a pretty good margin. However, you're also paying much more for that margin, and where it's a little bit slower in certain tasks that uses just like the single core GPU, doesn't use a lot of memory, it's only slower by a margin bit, but this is what we get for being one chip architecture generation behind, for example, the M4 Max and the M4 Pro. So if you're a new purchaser, if you're just coming into this, I think M3 Ultra is a really great machine, but I would also not discount the M2 Ultra and M1 Ultra generation, because depending on what you do, this can be and represent a good value for your workflow. If you're an upgrader, you have to really think about where you are, and if you need to expand, like if you need more memory in the system, there's no way to do that. Getting a new machine would be the way to go. But otherwise, if you already have an Ultra, I think you just might be okay there, unless you really want to go from M1 to M3. Remember, my upgrade priorities still apply. If you want to get the most performance per dollar, start out with memory. You're going to be locked into a chip family, but that is what it is. Then choose the SSD size if you want to go from there. And lastly, if you have the option, you can choose to upgrade the chip variants, but you're going to get very little from that. All right. So for my recommendation chart, one thing that we don't really see in this chart anymore is the M1 Pro, because the M1 Pro is a little bit slow. If you have the M1 Pro, I highly recommend you upgrade. So when it comes to Lightroom Classic, good, better, best, you just read that across. Pro is good, better would be the Max, and the best would definitely be the Ultra Silicon. So for Photoshop, I would probably say if you want to get like the best Photoshop machine right now, M4 Pro, M3 Max, and also M4 Max machine, and just get more memory, especially if you work with larger files, but that's going to give you the best performance. That's what I think. I think M2 Max is still there, M3 Pro is still there, but those are starting to get a little bit old, and M2 Pro and M1 Max, that's starting to get really old there. All right, so for Capture One, what are my thoughts about that? Well, I have to rescale this chart to add the Ultra in, because now it makes sense to get the Ultra. At one point, I recommend to get the Max Silicon and only get the base Max Silicon. Don't upgrade if you're running on Capture One, because you can't utilize that. They finally gone in and upped their software and utilized the extra GPU core after 4 or 5 years. I'm so happy to see that. I am so happy I don't have to recommend that anymore. And you can get more performance from Capture One now by going to a better silicon. Lastly, if you do video, Pro will still kind of do you good, but I would say if you're really doing a lot of video, any day Ultra will do you just fine. Particularly, I would say M1 Ultra still represents a great value. And because we're talking about an Ultra machine and all of Apple computers start at 16 gigabytes of memory now, I'm not really going to spend a lot of time talking about RAM or SSD, but you can think about that when you configure your machine. Lastly, for any upgraders, the best thing that you can do is to circle the silicon you're on and decide if you want to upgrade or not. If you're on the M3 Max, going to the Ultra is not a bad deal. But I would also argue that, for example, if you're on like the M1, time to upgrade, by the way. But if you're on, for instance, like the M3, it's not a bad idea to just jump and go to, for instance, like the M1 Ultra. Yes, the price is going to be more, but the price that you pay per dollar, depending on the refurb or use market, might represent a really great value. Now, with regards to the M4 Max, I still put this arrow here, but that might be one of those like iffy, like if you want to edge out the performance to the very top, I think that would be the way to go. But I think that this generation Max Studio M4 Max is going to hold its own just fine, and we're going to find that out in the next few videos that I'll be releasing on this channel. So anyway, I hope that you find that helpful. And like I said, one of the things that I think about in this particular video is that if this is the only video I do for this generation release, I think I'm good here. Anyway, Please share me your thoughts and comments in the section below. Remember to be kind, give this a like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you're new. I'm Art, and I thank you for your time.